Orphaned at 18, she inherited her grandpa's abandoned barn, but what she discovered hidden inside would change the entire story of her life. It's a story about how the places we think are empty are sometimes the fullest, and how the people we think abandoned us were sometimes the ones holding on the tightest. If you've ever felt lost, or like a piece of your own story was missing, I hope you'll stick around for this. And maybe hit that subscribe button, because we talk about real things here, the hard things, the things that make us who we are. The day I turned 18 was the day I became homeless. That sounds more dramatic than it felt. It didn't feel like anything. It felt like Tuesday. For the last 6 years, since my grandpa died, my home had been a series of bedrooms in other people's houses, and for the last 2, it was a cot in a state-run group home. Freedom didn't feel like a sunrise. It felt like a door clicking shut behind me, the sound echoing in a hallway that no longer had any claim on me. Miss Albright, my case manager for the final stretch, stood on the porch of the home, holding a single cardboard box. It was gray and overcast, the kind of sky that promises a cold rain but can't be bothered to deliver. The air was damp and smelled of city exhaust and wet pavement. Miss Albright had a permanently tired look, the kind you get when your job is to manage the fallout of other people's tragedies. She wasn't unkind, just worn smooth. Like a river stone. "That's everything, Maya," she said, her voice flat. The box contained the sum total of my documented life. A few worn paperbacks, a photo of my mom and dad I couldn't remember, a faded quilt my grandpa had kept on his couch, and a stack of official papers with my name on them. Birth certificate, social security card, records of my passage through the system. Proof of existence. I took the box. It wasn't heavy. "You have the address for the shelter?" she asked. I nodded. It was a piece of paper in my pocket, folded into a tiny, sharp square. Another address, another temporary bed. And the bus tokens. It wasn't a question. She had watched me count them. Yes. She sighed, a little puff of air that barely disturbed the humidity. "Look, Maya, it's a tough start. But you're smart. You're quiet, you stay out of trouble. You'll be okay." It was the standard speech, the one they gave to all the kids aging out. A verbal pat on the head. I knew she meant it, in her own way. But okay felt like a very distant country. She held out one last thing. A thick, cream-colored envelope. It looked ancient, important. My name was typed on the front. "This came for you, last week. From a law firm. We're supposed to hold official mail until your release date." I took it. The paper was heavy, expensive. It felt alien in my hands. A law firm? "Davies, Fletcher & Cole, downtown." She shrugged, a gesture that said this was the end of her responsibility. "Probably nothing. Sometimes it's about outstanding debt from a relative. Don't let them scare you into signing anything." That made sense. My grandpa, in the end, had been a man of debt. After my parents' car went off that icy bridge when I was 5, he'd taken me in. We'd lived in a small, rented house on the edge of nowhere. He worked odd jobs, fixed tractors, and smelled of grease and soil. The social workers who came after he had his heart attack told me he'd left behind nothing. Less than nothing. Just bills. I was 12, and the state became my guardian. The word inheritance wasn't in my vocabulary. "Okay," I said, tucking the envelope into my jacket pocket. It felt strangely warm against my chest. "Good luck, Maya." Ms. Albright gave me a final, brief look, her eyes holding a flicker of something I couldn't name. Pity? Maybe. Or maybe just the professional exhaustion of seeing another file closed. Then she turned and went back inside, the heavy door closing with a definitive thud. And just like that, it was over. 6 years of being a ward of the state, a name on a list, a problem to be managed. I was standing on a sidewalk with a box, a bus pass, and a letter from a lawyer. The street was quiet. A few cars hissed by on the wet asphalt. I looked up at the blank, gray sky. For the first time, there was no one to tell me where to go or when to be there. I was completely, terrifyingly, numbly free. I should have walked to the bus stop. I should have gone to the shelter, secured a bed for the night. That was the sensible plan. But my hand kept drifting to my pocket, to the crisp edges of that envelope. Debt, Ms. Albright had said. Probably just more debt. But it was a thread, a loose string from a past I thought was all sewn up and buried. I pulled out the letter. My fingers were trembling, from the cold, or something else, I couldn't tell. I tore it open. The letterhead was embossed, the text formal. It was from a Mr. Alistair Davies. It said that upon the occasion of my 18th birthday, I was to be informed of the final dispensation of the estate of my grandfather, Arthur Pike. It requested my presence at his office to discuss the matter of an inheritance. An inheritance. The word was right there, in black and white. It specified the property, one barn and the 2.7 acres of land on which it stood, located at a rural address I hadn't thought about in years. The address of the place we'd lived before he'd moved us to that last, sad little rental house. Before everything fell apart. Mr. Davies was exactly what you'd picture when you hear the words estate lawyer. He was a man made of gray. Gray suit, gray hair, even his eyes seemed a pale, washed-out gray. His office was on the 32nd floor of a glass tower that scraped the clouds. The view from his window was a sprawling map of the city, a concrete circuit board of endless lights and movement. It made me feel very small. I was still carrying the cardboard box. I didn't know where else to put it. I set it on the floor next to the plush leather chair he'd gestured me toward. The box looked pathetic and out of place, a piece of driftwood washed up in a palace. He cleared his throat, a dry, rustling sound. Miss Pike, he began, folding his hands on the polished expanse of his desk. Thank you for coming. I was your grandfather's attorney for the last few years of his life. I didn't know he had an attorney, I said. My voice sounded small and thin in the quiet, carpeted room. He engaged my services for one specific purpose, to draft his will and to ensure its terms were executed upon your coming of age. It was his express wish that you not be contacted until your 18th birthday. He was very insistent on that point. The way he said insistent made it sound like my grandpa had been a difficult client. I could picture it. My grandpa was a man of few words and immovable opinions. He didn't trust people in suits. The idea of him in this office was almost funny. So, the letter was real, I said. The barn. Yes. Mr. Davies slid a folder across the desk. The property is yours. The deed is clear. However, he paused, letting the word hang in the air. This was the part Ms. Albright had warned me about. I feel it is my duty to advise you on the practical realities of the situation. He opened the folder. It was full of documents, figures, maps. The property, as it stands, has very little market value. The farmhouse that was once on the land burned down over a decade ago. All that remains is the foundation. The barn is, well, it's a barn. Old, in need of significant repair. Furthermore, your grandfather was unable to keep up with the property taxes for the last 4 years of his life. There is a substantial amount of debt owed to the county. He named a number that made my stomach clench. It might as well have been $1 million. It was an impossible sum. So Ms. Albright was right. It was about debt. The hope that had flickered in me died out, leaving a familiar, cold ash. I don't have any money, I said quietly. It was a stupid thing to say. Of course I didn't have any money. I'm aware of your circumstances, Miss Pike, he said, his tone softening slightly. Which brings me to the second part of this. For the past 2 years, a developer, Horizon Corporation, has been acquiring land in that area. They plan a large-scale residential and commercial project. Your grandfather's parcel is one of the last holdouts. They have a standing offer on the table. He slid another paper toward me. It had the Horizon Corp logo at the top. The offer was for a sum that was, not coincidentally, just slightly more than the back taxes owed. Enough to settle the debt with the county and leave me with a few $1,000s. A few $1,000s, he said, as if reading my mind. would be a far more practical inheritance for a young woman in your position than a derelict barn and a mountain of tax debt. It could secure you a small apartment, give you a buffer while you find work. It's a fresh start. He was right. It was the only logical choice. Take the money. Walk away. Forget the barn. Forget the land. Forget the ghost of a man who had left me to the system. It was clean. It was simple. It was a way out. My life had been a series of practical realities. This was just one more. I should have felt relieved. A path had been laid out, clean and paved. But I just felt empty. I looked past him, out the window, at the endless, sprawling city. A fresh start. Here? In another anonymous apartment, with another temporary job, just another face in the crowd? What was he like? I asked, the question surprising me as much as it did him. My grandpa, when he came here. Mr. Davies blinked, his professional mask slipping for a second. He was determined. He knew what he wanted. He didn't say much. He just wanted to ensure the property would pass to you, and only you, on your 18th birthday. He said you needed a choice. Your own choice, made when you were old enough to make it. A choice. That was the word he'd used. Not an inheritance. A choice. I thought of the quilt in the box next to me, the smell of his workshop, the rough feel of his calloused hand holding mine. These were ghosts of memories, faded and worn, but they were the only ones I had. The developer's offer felt like an erasure, the final step in wiping him and that part of my life off the map completely. I want to see it, I said. The words came out stronger than I expected. Mr. Davies raised an eyebrow. See it? Miss Pike, I've shown you the satellite photos. It is, with all due respect, not worth the bus fare. I want to see it anyway, I repeated, before I decide. He studied me for a long moment, his gray eyes searching my face. I think he expected me to be a child, someone who would just do what the adult in the suit told her to do. I had been that child for a long time. Maybe I wasn't anymore. He saw something there, a flicker of my grandfather's stubbornness, perhaps. Finally, he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Very well, he said, closing the folder. The offer from Horizon stands for 30 days. After that, the county will likely move to seize the property for the unpaid taxes. The choice, as your grandfather wished, is yours. For now. The unspoken part of his sentence hung in the air. Don't be a fool. I picked up my box. It felt a little heavier now, weighted with a choice I didn't know I had. He gave me a printout with the bus schedule and a hand-drawn map of how to get to the property from the town's bus stop. As I stood to leave, he said one last thing. Your grandfather loved you very much, Miss Pike. Whatever else you may think, I am certain of that. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and walked out of the silent, gray office, back into the noise of the world. I had 30 days. The bus ride was a journey backward in time. The city's towering glass and steel gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to strip malls and highways, and finally to something else entirely. The landscape flattened and widened. The sky, still a uniform, heavy gray, seemed to press down on the fields. The rain had finally started, a steady, hissing drizzle that smeared the view from the window into a watercolor of greens and browns. I watched the city lights fade in the rearview mirrors of my memory, feeling a strange mix of terror and relief. Every mile the bus traveled put more distance between me and the life I had known, a life of being managed, of being an entry in a file. I was heading toward a place I barely remembered, a place that, according to a lawyer, was worth less than nothing. And yet, for the first time since I walked out of the group home, I felt like I was moving towards something, instead of just away. I rested my forehead against the cool, vibrating glass of the window. The other passengers were few and far between. A tired-looking woman with 2 restless kids, an old man asleep with his mouth open, a young man in a military uniform staring blankly ahead. We were all in transit, all suspended between a place we'd left and a place we were going. I thought about what Mr. Davies had said. A choice. My grandpa had gone to a fancy lawyer to give me a choice. Not money, not security. A choice between a few $1,000s and a derelict barn. It made no sense. Why not just sell it himself and put the money in an account for me? Why this elaborate, delayed inheritance? Why make me, an 18-year-old with nothing, travel to a piece of forgotten land to decide its fate? Memories of him were patchy. I remembered the scent of sawdust and oil in his workshop. I remembered the deep rumble of his voice when he'd read to me from a book of fairy tales. I remembered the day the social workers came. He'd had a heart attack while working in the fields. They found him hours later. I was at a neighbor's house. They told me he was gone, and that he'd been very poor, and that I would have to go somewhere else now. They were kind, but firm. I cried, not because I understood death, but because I understood I was alone. I had spent the last 6 years believing he had left me with nothing, that he had failed, that our small life together had ended in a pile of bills. And now, this strange, impractical legacy. The bus wheezed to a stop in what seemed like the middle of nowhere. A single blinking yellow light hung over a crossroads. There was a gas station with rust stains running down from its signs, a diner with the word "Eat" glowing in lonely red neon against the gray afternoon, and a handful of boarded-up storefronts. "Brooks Hollow," the driver called out, his voice gravelly. This was it. This was my stop. I grabbed my box and my backpack and stepped out. The bus pulled away with a hydraulic sigh, leaving me in a profound silence, broken only by the ticking of the yellow light and the soft hiss of the rain on the asphalt. The air was different here. It smelled of wet earth, of pine trees, of decay and life all mixed together. It was the smell of my earliest memories. I pulled on my thin jacket and looked at the map Mr. Davies had given me. 2 miles down a road called Sparrow Creek Lane. I shifted the box under one arm and started walking. The road was cracked and lined with skeletal, dripping trees. There were no sidewalks. I walked on the muddy shoulder, my cheap sneakers quickly soaking through. A pickup truck rattled past, the driver a silhouette behind the rain-streaked windshield. He didn't slow down. I was an anomaly here, a girl with a box walking in the rain. After about a mile, the houses thinned out and then disappeared altogether, replaced by dense woods and overgrown fields. It was beautiful in a wild, melancholy way. The world felt ancient and indifferent. I felt like a ghost walking through my own past. And then I saw it. A rusted, leaning mailbox with the name Pike, barely visible under layers of grime and rust. A gravel driveway, now more weeds than gravel, disappeared into a thicket of trees. My heart started beating faster. This was it. I turned down the driveway, the overgrown branches scraping at my jacket. The path opened up into a clearing, and my breath caught in my throat. Mr. Davies was right. The house was gone. There was just a stone foundation, a dark, rectangular scar on the land, already being reclaimed by weeds and wildflowers. It looked like an ancient ruin, a place where something had once been, but was no more. But beyond it, at the far end of the clearing, stood the barn. It was huge, far bigger than I remembered. Its wood was weathered to a silvery gray, like driftwood. The roof sagged in the middle, and a few of the windows were broken, dark eyes staring out at the rain. But it was standing, proud and defiant against the gray sky. It wasn't a ruin, it was a survivor. I walked toward it, my wet sneakers sinking into the soft ground. The big sliding doors were closed, secured with a heavy chain and a new-looking brass padlock. My heart sank. Of course it was locked. What did I expect? To just walk in? I trudged around the perimeter, peering into the dusty, broken windows. It was dark inside, vast and shadowy. I could see the shapes of old machinery, stacks of lumber, and a thick layer of dust over everything. On the far side, there was a smaller, normal-sized door. I tried the handle. It was locked too. Frustration and a deep, aching disappointment washed over me. I had come all this way for nothing. I was cold, wet, and tired. The shelter in the city seemed like a paradise now. I slumped down, my back against the rough wood of the barn, and pulled my knees to my chest. The rain dripped from the eaves, a steady, mournful rhythm. I was an idiot, a sentimental fool chasing a ghost. I should have taken the money. I sat there for a long time, listening to the rain. I was about to give up, to trudge the 2 miles back to the ghost town and wait for the next bus back to reality, when my eyes caught on something. Tucked under the lip of the doorframe, almost completely hidden, was a small magnetic lockbox, the kind people use to hide a spare key. It was caked with mud and cobwebs. My fingers fumbled with the cold metal. It clicked open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single, old-fashioned iron key. It was heavy and ornate. It wasn't for the modern brass padlock on the main doors. It had to be for the side door. With a surge of adrenaline, I jammed the key into the old lock. It was stiff, resistant. I put all my weight into it, turning. There was a loud, grating click. The lock had opened. I pushed the door. It groaned on its rusty hinges and swung inward, opening into a cathedral of dust and shadows. I stepped across the threshold, out of the rain and into the heart of my inheritance. The air inside the barn was thick and still, carrying the scent of 100 years of hay, soil, and slumbering secrets. Dust motes danced like tiny stars in the weak gray light filtering through the grimy windows and the gaps in the roof. The space was cavernous, the ceiling rising 2 stories high to a web of massive, hand-hewn beams. It was a place built to last. To my left, empty animal stalls lined the wall, their wooden gates hanging ajar like open mouths. To my right, ancient, rust-covered farm equipment sat silent under thick shrouds of dust. A plow, a thresher, things I only knew from pictures. It was a museum of a forgotten way of life, my grandfather's life. Straight ahead, at the far end of the barn, was a partitioned-off section, a workshop. I walked toward it, my footsteps echoing in the immense quiet. My sneakers left dark prints in the thick layer of dust on the concrete floor, the first tracks laid here in years. The workshop was his sanctuary. I remembered this place. It was smaller, warmer in my memory. But the layout was the same. A long, heavy workbench stood against the back wall, its surface scarred with the history of 1,000 projects. Tools hung in neat outlines on a pegboard above it, wrenches, saws, hammers, each in its place. A film of dust covered everything, but underneath it, there was order. My grandpa had been a chaotic farmer, but a meticulous craftsman. On one end of the bench sat an old metal vise, and on the other, a small pot-bellied stove, a rusty pipe snaking up toward the ceiling. I ran my hand along the surface of the workbench. The wood was worn smooth as glass in some places, rough and gouged in others. I could almost feel the phantom impression of his hands. This was real. This was his. I spent an hour just exploring, touching things, breathing in the atmosphere of the place. It was like walking through a photograph. I found a stack of old farmer's almanacs, a half-finished birdhouse, a jar of bent nails he was probably planning to straighten. Simple things. The artifacts of a simple man. There was nothing here. No hidden treasure. No secret that would explain the strange inheritance. The lawyer was right. It was just an old barn. The feeling of disappointment returned, sharper this time. The hope that had carried me here felt naive, childish. I had been so sure that coming here would mean something, that I would find some answer. But the only answer I found was the one Mr. Davies had already given me. Sell. Take the money and run. Defeated, I leaned against the workbench, the rough edge pressing into my back. I was tired, so deeply tired. My eyes scanned the floor, a random, sweeping gaze of resignation. And then I saw it. Under the workbench, in the deepest shadow, one of the floorboards looked different. It wasn't the wood itself, but the dust. The dust everywhere else was a thick, uniform blanket. But on the seams of this one particular board, the dust was disturbed. It was faint, a subtle disruption, the kind you would never notice unless you were looking for something you couldn't find. My heart gave a painful lurch. I knelt down, my jeans soaking up the damp chill from the concrete. I ran my fingers along the edge of the board. There was no nail head. I pressed on one end. Nothing. Then the other. It gave, just a fraction of an inch, with a soft squeak. There was a small notch cut into the side, almost invisible. I hooked my fingernails into it and pulled. The board lifted. It came away in my hands, revealing a dark, rectangular cavity beneath the floor. My breath hitched. Inside the hollow space sat a small, dark green metal box, the kind soldiers use for ammunition. It was old and heavy, with a sturdy latch on the front. It wasn't locked. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the latch. It sprang open with a metallic click. I stared inside. There was no gold, no jewels. It was filled to the brim with paper. On top was a thick stack of envelopes, bound together with a faded rubber band. They were addressed to me, in my grandfather's familiar, spidery handwriting. For Maya. And underneath the letters, there was something else. A small, tarnished silver key attached to a simple leather fob. I lifted the letters out. They were heavy. There were at least a dozen of them, each one a thick bulge. I sat back on my heels on the dusty floor, the cold seeping into my bones, and I stared at the name he had written. For Maya. He had been writing to me. All this time, I had thought he was gone, a ghost, a memory. But he had been here, in a way, leaving words for me. I pulled the rubber band off. It was brittle and snapped in my fingers. The letters were not dated, but numbered. Letter number 1, letter number 2, and so on. My hands trembled as I opened the first one. The paper was crisp, the ink a dark, determined blue. My dearest Maya, it began. The moment I read those words, a dam inside me broke. A flood of grief I had been holding back for 6 years, a grief I hadn't even known was there, washed over me. I cried. I sat on the floor of that cold, silent barn and sobbed, for the little girl who lost her grandfather, for the teenager who believed she was abandoned, for the man who had written these words, knowing he would be gone before I ever read them. I cried for everything we had lost. After a long time, the tears subsided, leaving me hollowed out and strangely calm. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my jacket and held the letter up to the fading light. My dearest Maya, I read again. If you are reading this, it means you are 18. It means you are a woman now. And it means you did not take the easy way out. I knew you wouldn't. You have my blood in you, and my blood is stubborn. I am so sorry, child. I am sorry for everything. I need you to listen very carefully, because the story you have been told about your life, about my life, is not the true one. It is the story I needed you to believe, to keep you safe. I did not abandon you. Every day since they took you has been a torment. But I had no choice. Years ago, before you were born, I made a mistake. I got involved with some very bad people. Powerful people. I saw things I shouldn't have seen. When I tried to get out, they made it clear that my family was not safe. Your parents, Maya, their death was not an accident. I have no proof, nothing that would stand up in a court of law, but in my heart, I know it. They were a message to me. So I took you, my sweet girl, and I ran. We hid in plain sight, living as poor as we could, so no one would ever look for us. When I got sick, I knew they would find you. The system, for all its faults, is a place to get lost. A place where a single orphan girl is just a number in a file. They would never look for you there. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, letting you go. It was my own prison sentence. But I did not leave you with nothing. This barn, this land, it is not an inheritance. It is a bunker. It is a puzzle box. The people I ran from are still out there. They have grown, changed their name, become a legitimate corporation. The same one that is trying to buy this land. They want this parcel to complete their project, but more than that, they want to erase the last piece of my history, just in case. Do not sell to them, Maya. Not yet. The choice I have left you is not between a barn and a few $1,000s. It is a much harder choice than that. Inside this barn is the truth. The full truth. Proof of what they did. But finding it will not be easy. And once you find it, you will have to decide what to do with it. This key I have left you is the first step. It does not open a door, it opens my work. Look for where I made my mark. Be smart. Be brave. I love you more than words can say. Your grandpa, Arthur. I read the letter 3 times. My mind was spinning, a frantic kaleidoscope of images and emotions. My parents, not an accident. The developer, Horizon Corp., the same one Mr. Davies told me about. They weren't just developers, they were the bad people. My grandfather hadn't been a simple farmer, he had been a man on the run. The poverty, the isolation, it hadn't been a failure, it had been a strategy. A disguise. He hadn't abandoned me. He had hidden me. The entire foundation of my life. The sad, simple story I had told myself for years, crumbled into dust. I was not the forgotten orphan of a poor old man. I was the granddaughter of a man who had fought a secret war, a man who had sacrificed everything to protect me. I looked around the vast, shadowy barn. It was no longer a derelict building. It was a fortress. It was a legacy. A cold fury, sharp and clean, began to burn away the fog of grief and confusion. He had left me a choice, and I was beginning to understand what it was. Run or fight. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where a truth you've held your entire life is suddenly flipped upside down. Where you find out that a story of abandonment was actually a story of protection. It's like the ground beneath your feet turning to water. Everything you thought you knew, every resentment you held, every wall you built around your heart, it all just dissolves. And you're left floating in a new, terrifying reality. If you've been through something like that, if you're rebuilding your own story from the ground up, I want you to know you're not alone. This community, this channel, it's for people like us, people who are figuring it out. So if this is hitting home for you, drop a comment below. I read every single one. Sharing your story, even a small piece of it, can be the first step to owning it. Now, let's get back to the barn. The sun was setting, painting the broken windows with strokes of orange and purple. The barn was growing darker, the shadows deeper and more menacing. But I wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had been replaced by a cold, sharp-edged purpose. I stood up, my joints stiff from the cold floor, and read the last lines of the letter again. This key I have left you is the first step. It does not open a door, it opens my work. Look for where I made my mark. I walked back over to the workbench, the tarnished silver key clutched in my hand. My work. His workbench. It had to be here. I scanned the scarred wooden surface, the pegboard of tools, the shelves underneath. Nothing looked like it had a lock. Look for where I made my mark." What was his mark? My eyes fell on a section of the workbench that was cleaner than the rest, as if it had been recently used or wiped down. In the center of this space was a small, intricate carving. It was a simple geometric pattern, two interlocking circles, a symbol I didn't recognize. But it was clearly deliberate, carved with a careful hand. It was his mark. I ran my fingers over it. The wood was smooth. I looked at the key. It was a strange shape, not like a modern key. The end was a complex, gear-like shape. I tried to fit it into the carving. Nothing. I felt a pang of frustration. Was this another dead end? I sat on the old stool in front of the bench, my head in my hands. Think, Maya. Think like him. He was a craftsman. He thought in terms of wood and metal, of joints and seams. He wouldn't make it obvious. My gaze drifted from the carving down to the front edge of the workbench. It was a thick, solid piece of timber, maybe 4 inches deep. As I looked along the edge, I noticed a tiny, almost invisible irregularity. A small, dark circle, no bigger than the head of a pin, interrupting the grain of the wood. It wasn't a knot. It looked like the end of a metal rod. I leaned closer. It was a keyhole drilled vertically into the edge of the bench, so well hidden you would never find it unless you were practically on your knees. My heart hammered against my ribs. I took the silver key. The end was designed to be inserted from below. I slid under the workbench, lying on my back on the cold, dusty concrete. Awkwardly, I reached up and guided the key into the tiny hole. It slid in perfectly. I turned it. There was no click, but I felt a soft, internal thunk, a mechanism shifting deep within the wood. I scrambled out from under the bench. Nothing had changed. The workbench looked exactly the same. I pushed on the top. I pulled on the drawers. Nothing. Despair began to creep back in. What had I missed? I looked at the carving again, the 2 interlocking circles. I traced them with my finger. And as my finger passed over the center point where the circles overlapped, I felt it. A slight give. A click. I pressed down harder. A section of the workbench, the part with the carving on it, sank down an inch and then sprang up. It wasn't a drawer front. It was a button. I pressed it again. This time, I heard a louder sound. A series of clicks and whirs, the sound of well-oiled gears turning. A vertical seam I hadn't even noticed appeared on the front of the workbench. A section of the thick wooden facade swung outward, revealing a deep, hidden compartment ingeniously built into the body of the bench itself. It was a masterpiece of hidden construction. My grandfather wasn't just a craftsman, he was a genius. Inside the compartment, it was packed tight. There was another stack of letters, even thicker than the first. There was a series of black, hard-bound ledger books, the kind accountants use. And there was a large, oilcloth-wrapped bundle. I lifted the bundle out first. It was heavy. I unwrapped it on the bench. My breath caught. It was cash, stacks and stacks of $100 bills neatly wrapped in paper bands. I didn't count it, but there were thousands, tens of thousands. Enough to pay the back taxes 10 times over. Enough to disappear, like he'd said. Enough for a new life, free and clear. This was the easy way out he had mentioned. The temptation to just take it, to walk away from the barn, the ledgers, the whole mess, was immense. I could be on a bus to anywhere by morning. No one would ever know. But I knew I couldn't, not after reading his first letter, not after finding this. This money wasn't an escape hatch, it was a war chest. I set the money aside and picked up the ledgers. I opened the first one. The pages were filled with my grandfather's neat, precise handwriting. Columns of numbers, dates, names, and coded entries. At first, it was just gibberish. But then I saw a name, repeated over and over again. HC Development. Horizon Corp. And next to it, transfers of money, shell corporations, offshore accounts. It was a detailed record of financial crimes, money laundering, fraud, bribery. It was all here, meticulously documented. He hadn't just been their accountant, he had been their bookkeeper, the one who knew where all the bodies were buried, financially speaking. I flipped to the last few pages of the final ledger. There were entries detailing payments to a private investigator to track down a former associate, my grandfather. And then, a single chilling entry dated 2 weeks after my parents' car crash. Problem solved. Final payment. It was the proof he never had. The smoking gun. My hands were shaking. This was what he had been hiding. This was what they were willing to kill for. And he had saved it all. For me. Finally, I turned to the last stack of letters. I opened the one on top, marked, Final Letter. Maya, it began, his handwriting a little shakier now. If you have found this, you have found everything. You have found the truth, and you have found the burden that comes with it. I am writing this from the hospital. The doctors say I don't have much time. I am so tired, child. But I cannot rest until I know you have this choice. In front of you is the evidence of their crimes. And the money is what I managed to skim from them over the years, a little bit at a time, my own private retirement fund. My justice. Now you have the choice I never did. You can take that money, disappear, live a quiet life somewhere they will never find you. No one would blame you. You owe them nothing. You owe me nothing. You deserve to be safe and happy. That is your first option. The second option is to fight. Use these ledgers, expose them. Take back our family's name and get justice for your parents. But I must warn you, this path is dangerous. They are powerful, and they are ruthless. They will not go down without a fight. You will not be safe. This barn, this land, will become a battlefield. I cannot make this choice for you. It has to be yours. Whatever you decide, know that my final thought will be of you. Know that I loved you with all my heart. Your choice, Maya. Live free or fight for the truth. Be brave. Your grandpa. Tears streamed down my face, dripping onto the brittle paper. He had given me everything. The tools to fight and the permission not to. He had trusted me to be old enough, wise enough, to choose. I looked at the stacks of cash. Freedom. I looked at the black ledgers. Justice. For a long time, I just sat there in the deepening twilight, the weight of 2 possible futures settling on my shoulders. I thought of the 6 years in the system, the feeling of being invisible, of being a loose end in someone else's story. I thought of my parents, faces I only knew from a single faded photograph. I thought of my grandfather, a man who had lived a lonely, frightened life to give me this moment, this choice. To take the money would be to let them win, to let them erase him and my parents and the truth. It would be to accept the story they had written. And I was done with that. I was done being a ghost. I carefully wrapped the money back up and placed it back in the hidden compartment. Then I took out the ledgers. My choice was made. I wasn't going to run. I was going to stay. I was going to fight. The first call I made was to Alistair Davies. I used the old landline phone in the workshop, a dusty rotary model that, to my astonishment, still had a dial tone. I had to find the number for his firm in one of Grandpa's old phone books. It was late, well past office hours, but I was transferred to a night service and, after insisting it was an emergency regarding the estate of Arthur Pike, I was given his personal cell number. He answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep and irritation. Davies? Mr. Davies, it's Maya Pike. There was a long pause. Miss Pike? It's nearly 10 o'clock. Is something wrong? I've made a decision about the property, I said, my voice steady, surprising myself. I'm not selling. A weary sigh came through the phone. Miss Pike, we discussed this. It's the only sensible option. Don't make an emotional decision you'll regret. It's not an emotional decision, I said. It's a practical one. You need to come here, to the barn. Come there? Now? That's a 2-hour drive. I have appointments in the morning. Whatever it is, it can wait. No, I said, my voice dropping. It can't. You were my grandfather's lawyer. He trusted you. He told me in his letter that if I decided to proceed, I should show you what I found. He said you were a good man, even if you were expensive. That last part, a direct quote from one of the letters, seemed to land. There was another long silence on the line. I could hear him breathing. I could picture him sitting up in bed, the professional annoyance giving way to curiosity, maybe even concern. A letter? What did you find, Miss Pike? I can't explain it over the phone. You have to see it for yourself. It's about Horizon Corporation. It's about why they really want this land. The name of the corporation was the final hook. I heard a rustling sound, the sound of someone getting out of bed. Stay there. Don't touch anything else. Don't talk to anyone. I'm on my way. The line went dead. The 2 hours I waited for him were the longest of my life. I lit a fire in the pot-bellied stove, the first warmth the barn had felt in years. The flames pushed back the damp chill and cast flickering, dancing shadows on the walls. I sat at the workbench with the ledgers open in front of me, the heart of my grandfather's secret life laid bare. I felt his presence in the room, a quiet, approving silence. I wasn't a scared kid anymore. I was the keeper of a legacy. Headlights finally swept across the clearing, and a sleek, dark sedan crunched to a stop on the gravel. Mr. Davies got out. In his tailored suit, he looked even more out of place here than I did. He looked around at the ruin of the house, the hulking shadow of the barn, his face a mask of skepticism. "Miss Pike," he said, his voice tight as he stepped inside. "This had better be important." I didn't say anything. I just pointed to the workbench. He walked over, his expensive shoes scuffing in the dust. He looked down at the open ledgers, at the columns of numbers and names. He picked one up. His face was illuminated by the single bare bulb I had managed to get working above the bench. I watched his expression change. The skepticism dissolved, replaced by a dawning comprehension, then shock, and then a deep, professional gravity. He spent almost an hour in silence, turning pages, his lawyer's mind absorbing, connecting, understanding the scale of what he was seeing. Finally, he looked up at me, his gray eyes wide. The pragmatic, slightly condescending lawyer was gone. In his place was a man who looked like he had just seen a ghost. "My God," he whispered. "He actually did it. The old man actually kept it all." "You knew?" I asked. "Knew? No, I suspected. When he hired me, he was cryptic. He talked about an insurance policy. He said he had enemies. I thought he was a paranoid old man with a grudge. I drafted the will as he instructed, but I never believed this." He gestured to the ledgers, a look of awe on his face. This is a corporate nuke. This could bring down the entire company, and people with it." He looked at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time. "He left this to you. He left this choice in the hands of a child." "I'm not a child," I said quietly. He nodded slowly. "No, I see that now. You're Arthur Pike's granddaughter." He closed the ledger and his whole demeanor shifted. The calm, pragmatic lawyer was back. But this time, he was on my side. He was my ally. "Okay, Miss Pike. Maya. Here's what happens now. First, no one else sees these. No one. Not the local sheriff, not the FBI, not yet. We don't know who Horizon has in their pocket. These books are our only leverage and our only shield. We are going into a fight against a very powerful, very wealthy, and very motivated opponent. They will not play fair. This is going to be long, and it's going to be ugly." He was trying to scare me, to test my resolve one last time. "I know," I said. "I'm not selling the land." A slow smile spread across his face. It was the first time I had seen him do anything but frown. "Good. First thing in the morning, I'm filing an injunction against the county for the tax seizure, citing a contested estate. That will buy us time. Then, you are going to go to the town hall and pay those back taxes. In cash. It's a message." "A message?" "It says, 'I'm here, I have resources, and I'm not going anywhere.'" The next day, I did just that. I walked into the tiny, wood-paneled Brooks Hollow Town Hall, a place that probably hadn't seen this much cash in one place, ever. I paid the full amount of my grandfather's debt. The woman behind the counter, a lady with a magnificent beehive of gray hair, looked at me, then at the money, then back at me, her eyes wide with curiosity. The news would be all over town by lunch. As I walked out, I saw a black SUV parked across the street, the kind with tinted windows. It sat there for a moment, then pulled away. The message had been received. The fight had begun. I started cleaning the barn, sweeping away the years of dust, patching the windows, making it my own. The local hardware store owner, a gruff man named Sal, gave me a discount on supplies after hearing I was Arthur Pike's granddaughter. "Your granddad was a good man," he'd grunted. "Quiet, but a good man." The woman who ran the diner gave me a free slice of pie. Small gestures, tiny threads of connection to a community I never knew I had. They were watching me, this town, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. The first winter in the barn was a trial by fire, or rather, by ice. The old pot-bellied stove became the center of my universe, a greedy god that demanded a constant tribute of firewood. I learned to split wood with an axe I found in the workshop, my hands, soft from years of indoor life, quickly becoming calloused and strong. I learned the anatomy of the cold, the way it seeped through the walls, the way it found every tiny crack. Some nights, I would huddle under a mountain of blankets, including the quilt from my box of belongings, and read my grandfather's letters, over and over, by the light of a kerosene lamp. They were a conversation across time. He wrote about his fears, his regrets, his love for the land, and his fierce, unwavering love for me. In those letters, I found the father I'd never known, and the grandfather I had barely gotten to. The barn was no longer just a structure, it was my home. I had cleared out one of the large stalls, laid down a proper floor with lumber from a local mill, and partitioned it off into a small, livable space. A bedroom, a tiny kitchen area. It was rustic, it was basic, but it was mine. Every nail I hammered, every board I sawed, was an act of reclamation. I was literally building my own life from the ashes of the old one. Outside, the world was a canvas of white. Snow buried the foundation of the old house, covered the fields, and clung to the bare branches of the trees. It was a quiet, muffled world. But the quiet was deceptive. The legal battle with Horizon Corporation was a distant, grinding war, fought by Mr. Davies in boardrooms and courtrooms hours away. He would call me once a week with updates. They had filed motions to dismiss. They had offered a settlement, a much larger one this time, which we had refused. They had hired private investigators to dig into my life, looking for any dirt they could find. They found nothing. My life in the system had been lonely and anonymous, and that anonymity was now a shield. One afternoon, looking out at the snow-covered landscape, I realized the inheritance my grandfather had left me wasn't the barn, or the money, or even the ledgers. It was the struggle. He had given me a purpose. For years, I had been adrift, a passenger in my own life. Now, I had a rudder, I had a direction. The choice to fight for this land, for his memory, had given me a strength I never knew I possessed. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. It was about refusing to let the story of my family be a footnote in the history of a corrupt company. It was about honoring the sacrifice of a man who had given up everything for me. Home, I realized, wasn't just a place with four walls and a roof. Home was a place where your story made sense. Home was a place you were willing to fight for. The barn, cold and drafty as it was the first true home I had ever known. The melancholy that had clung to me for so long was beginning to lift, replaced by a quiet, fierce hope. I was no longer haunted by the past. I was empowered by it. I had dug up the roots of my life, and instead of finding rot, I had found a deep, unshakable foundation. The winter thawed into a wet, muddy spring. The snow receded, revealing the green shoots of new life. The fight was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. Mr. Davies had explained that cases like this could take years. There would be more motions, more delays, more threats veiled as legal maneuvers. Horizon Corp wouldn't just surrender. But something in the air had changed. The black SUV was no longer parked down the road. The pressure had eased, as if they were regrouping, reassessing their strategy now that they knew I wouldn't be easily intimidated or bought out. They knew I had the ledgers. It was a stalemate, a cold war fought with paper and lawyers. But I had the one thing they couldn't take from me. I had the land. I had the truth. And I had time. This story, my story, doesn't have a neat and tidy ending. There was no dramatic courtroom showdown, no sudden victory. Real life is rarely that clean. The victory was in the choice. The victory was in staying. It was in the quiet moments, planting a small garden in the rich soil near the old foundation, watching the sunrise paint the sky from the loft of the barn, sharing a cup of coffee with Sal from the hardware store when he dropped off a delivery. The victory was in building a life where a tragedy was supposed to be. It was in transforming a place of secrets and sorrow into a place of strength and hope. My grandfather gave me a choice: live free or fight for the truth. I realized, in the end, they were the same thing. You can't be truly free until you own your own truth. So I want to ask you, what does home mean to you? Is it a place? A person? A feeling? Is it something you were given, or something you had to build for yourself? So many of us carry around stories that were given to us, narratives of who we are supposed to be, based on where we came from or what we've been through. But we have the power to pick up the pen and write our own next chapter. My story is about inheriting a barn, but it's really about inheriting a choice. The choice to define yourself, to fight for what matters, and to build a home in the place you were told was worthless. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in second chances and the power of fighting for your own truth, please consider subscribing to the channel. Be a part of this community. And share in the comments below one time you chose the harder right over the easier wrong. I'll be reading because your stories matter. They are the foundation of everything we build from here. For now, the sun is coming up over the fields. I have seeds to plant and a future to grow.